The Stanley Cup Playoffs do not sleep, and neither do we. What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live, brought to you by Sticks.com. I'm your host, Emma Lingen. I'm joined tonight by Mike Agello and Michael Tracos. We are coming at you live, of course, to recap Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Final. Now, Florida takes a commanding win in this one, 5-1. Now leads the series 2-1. Um, it's the first game this series that hasn't gone to OT, but it almost feels like an overtime game might have been shorter. A lot of penalty minutes. We're going to get to this one in just a little bit here. But first, just do want to reiterate, wherever you are watching us tonight, whether it's YouTube, X, Instagram, Facebook, anywhere else, we encourage you to send us your questions, send us your comments, your chirps, your rants and raves, anything that you have. We love to hear them, love talking about them with you, and seeing what everyone is saying about this game. And what a game it was. As I mentioned, I believe it was 140 penalty minutes between the two teams. Mike, this is going to be hard tonight. Michael Agello, I will start with you. It was kind of crazy. I feel like it seemed like early on Florida was taking more of the penalties, but then, of course, they were the first ones to score on the power play, and then it all just kind of went downhill from there. I mean, to me, it seemed like the issue with the penalties that Edmonton was taking was that they were just so undisciplined and so unnecessary. What did you think of the way that Edmonton played tonight?
Well, I didn't think it was possible for a team to be as dumb as the Ottawa Senators were in Game 1 against Toronto, where they took a bunch of stupid penalties and undisciplined, Ridley Gregg and everybody, just trying to chop different players and just trying to, Edmonton was completely unhinged. Now, granted, there were a couple instances like on the goal that made it 3-1 early in the second period, where I think it was Barkov slashed Klingberg, and Klingberg fell down and created a turnover and ended up in the back of the net. And I mean, that was something that should have been called, but wasn't called. But Edmonton went bonkers. They could not control themselves. They bought and primarily Evander Kane, he could be as reckless as he is talented. He's an extremely talented player. He just takes dumb penalties constantly. And Edmonton dug themselves a hole and kept digging. And now I think they're back in Edmonton. They dug such a big hole.
Well, what a way to start off the show. All the way back to Edmonton. Yep.
Michael, how it works. If you dig far enough in Fort Lauderdale there, Mike, you end up in Alberta. That's great.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, the Oilers might be about to find out here. I think, Michael Tracos, now I'll ask you, I mean, looking at the way that everything sort of unraveled, particularly in the third period, we saw a full out line brawl at the end. Did it kind of feel inevitable, like that's where this series was headed? I mean, how much of a factor do you think this whole rematch element plays into it? How much do you think it's these two teams in particular just really hating each other, and how much of it is just the frustration and just being in the Stanley Cup final again?
Yeah, well, I think Florida, and they did this against Toronto, they did against Tampa, and against Carolina, you give them an inch and they really can embarrass you. And we saw it tonight against Edmonton. This Edmonton team is a really good team. Like, Game 1, the Oilers were just fantastic. Even Game 2, that they score the goal to force overtime, and they're right there with the Panthers. And then they have a little miscue, and whether it's undisciplined penalties by Kane or just not able to, when you score a goal, keep that momentum. But Florida, and we talked to Bruce Boudreau about this on the Big Show, they have a way of just smelling blood in the water and really going for the jugular. So, this is easily Edmonton's worst game of the playoffs. And the thing is, can they flush it? And come back for game 4 and do what they did in games 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's going to be the question. I think one thing that we do definitely need to talk about here, because it keeps coming back with the Oilers in these playoffs, is the goaltending situation. So, gonna talk about that in a second. First, do want to remind everyone that Playoff Frenzy Live is brought to you by Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's Stix.com. Head there now and gear up. All right. So finally, we maybe saw the real Stuart Skinner, or what we thought was the real Stuart Skinner. Obviously gave up 4 goals early, and it was, I think you could argue that Stuart Skinner wasn't the reason that Edmonton was down 4-1 at that point. But this is a coach in Chris Knobloch who has not shown any hesitation in the past to pull his goaltender when things get rough like this, but yet he decided to leave him in for the start of the third period, gets scored on again. Sam Reinhart scored on the power play. That was his second goal of the night. Then Knobloch decides to pull Stuart Skinner, puts in Calvin Pickard. Again, at that point, too little, too late, ends up being a 6-1 final for the Panthers. But Mike Agello, I need to start specifying. What are your thoughts on, looking at the goaltending situation? You and I have talked about this quite a bit on the wraparound. The goaltending situation in Edmonton has never been a strong suit here. But I think tonight we really saw sort of, that Achilles heel, or that chink in their armor a little bit. But what did you think of the decision to leave in for the start of the third period, and then to ultimately yank him about 5 minutes in after Reinhart scored? And then follow up to that, do you think we see Skinner starting game 4?
I'm not surprised they kept him in the beginning of the third period, because like you said, I don't think the goals were really on him. I think there was breakdowns in the Edmonton defense, which I think had the worst games since games 1 and 2 against Los Angeles. And coincidentally, that's when Skinner was, pulled in favor of Pickard. He's as good as the defense in front of him. You can call him Civ Skinner, which I've heard people call him before. But you need a defense to be able to prevent opportunities. If it's limited opportunities, I think he can manage a game and they can win with him. But I thought Florida had the better of the chances, and the killer was that goal early in the second period. You get a goal to make it 2-1, and maybe the tide is turned after Florida dominates the first period, and then Florida comes right back and scores that goal to make it 3-1, and then it was pretty much downhill from then. Do I think Skinner is going to start game 4? They're probably going to go back to him, but it's going to be a short leash. Because if they lose that game, they're down 3-1. And if they're down 3-1, they're not winning the series.
Pickard is 6-0, just to let you know. 6-0 since coming in Pickard 6-0 since coming in for Skinner. So that is a heck of a stat. The other stat to keep in mind, this was his first time playing since May 8th. So to go a whole month without playing in the playoffs, and then just to kind of get thrown into the fire, the Stanley Cup final, probably a lot to ask of Calvin Pickard. But why did he get put in? It wasn't because Skinner was terrible. Like, none of those goals were on the goaltender's fault. But is it in the back of Knobloch's mind that if game 4 does not go Skinner's way, that he has to go with Pickard possibly again? Well, now at least you got him a taste of some action, and now you don't have to go another month before you see him again.
Yeah, and I think too, something with the, what's interesting about Skinner, and this could just be the eye test, I think, I don't really have the numbers to back this up, but it seems like, at least from the past, when you pull him and then, sit him a couple games and then put him back in, that's when he does his best work. So if, there's always that possibility as well. We've got a question here. Were the Oilers too picky when they had chances? Not every play can be picture perfect. I want to see more shots thrown at Bob from bad angles.
It's a
Thanks.
good
Shout out
point.
to Andrew McInnes for that. Good friend of the show.
Yeah,
It is a good point, because I think when you look at the difference between the two goaltenders, like you said, Mike, there was not, it wasn't Skinner's fault that they were down by that much. But if you look at Skinner compared to Bobrovsky, Bobrovsky was coming up big in those moments when you needed him to, making those kind of game-saving saves. And I feel like Skinner was not. I mean, Michael Trakos, what did you think of the chances that the Oilers had? Do you think they were being too picky, or they should have
100%.
just thrown more on the net?
Yeah. Well, Connor McDavid gets 2 shots on net, Emma. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, who we didn't even know if he was going to play or not, he ends up with 1 shot. Leon Draisaitl, here's a stat that sticks out for me: 0 shots, 0 shot attempts. And this is a guy that won the Rocket Richard this year, and going into this series was thought of as potential Conn Smythe winner. So to have a combined 3 shots from McDavid, Nugent-Hopkins, and Draisaitl, that's a great point. There's just not enough shots coming from the Oilers versus the Panthers, where it seemed like they were just peppering Skinner and Pickard with pucks on net.
I think there was a level of frustration on the part of the Oilers in the first period because they had 12 shots and Bobrovsky was fantastic. The scheduling of this series definitely is in the favor of Florida in the sense that Bobrovsky is, I believe, 36. And you're getting 2 days in between, 3 days in between. For a veteran goalie, he was gassed. A lot of people think that the comeback from the Oilers in the final last year was because Bobrovsky was gassed, because they had played so many games, and it was a situation where it was just catching up to him, and then he summoned up the will in Game 7. He's getting rest in between these really tough games, and that's to his benefit.
Yeah, especially with the overtimes. That's a really good point. Like, a lot of miles on that body. Like, I don't think Anthony Stolarz played at all last playoffs. Like the year before, we saw Alex Lyons start the playoffs and then they went to Bob. But, when you go to back finals, that's a lot of wear and tear in the body, especially, you mentioned his age, but I would just, highlight the fact that, we went to a double overtime in Game 2 and then another hard overtime in Game 1 where, it was less than a minute left where Draisaitl scores the winner. So, it's a good point, Mike. And, I'm sure Bob's not feeling it today or not going to be feeling it tomorrow. That Victor Arvidsson accidental running into him, like, we're seeing that more and more now. I think Bennett really kind of set off a chain of events now where goalies are just free game.
Yeah, I mean, if you're apparently it doesn't matter if you're in the crease or not. I mean, guys are just going to come flying at you, whatever advantage they can take. I think talking about, I want to go back a second to, you mentioned Leon Draisaitl having no shots on goal, Connor McDavid being limited as well. It just seems like Florida has done, especially in this game, Florida did such a good job of just frustrating the Oilers stars, not just shutting them down. Obviously they shut them down, but I mean, you talk about Draisaitl, he looked visibly frustrated out there, and that is not comforting to me if I'm the Oilers, if Leon Draisaitl is out there getting visibly frustrated with what's going on. So it's funny because obviously we talk about Florida, we talk about what a deep team they are, they're just built so well. Edmonton, it's like, well, they're not as deep, but they have their star power, can outplay Florida's. But it seemed like kind of the story up until tonight was that it was Edmonton's depth. Edmonton's depth players were really coming up big for them. And so you would think that that would happen in a game like tonight, where the Stars do get frustrated and do get shut down to the level that they did. But I mean, do you think, Mike Agello, I'll ask you first, do you think that it's just kind of a one-off fluke thing that the Oilers depth players just didn't show up tonight? Or is that more concerning of sort of a long-term trend that, hey, if McDavid and Draisaitl aren't going, then no one's going?
Well, when you get outplayed by Gadjevic and AJ Greer, you're in trouble. I mean, they're very workmanlike players, but they're energy guys. They're fourth line guys. But the depth players on the Oilers, like Arvidsson, like Connor Brown, I thought they got outplayed by the third and fourth lines of the Panthers, and we know the third line of Lusterine and Lindell and Marchand was the difference in the Toronto series and made a big difference in the Eastern Conference Final. They haven't done as much as they did in those two series, but Marchand is ageless, and he's great, and he's antagonizing at the same time. So yeah, I mean, Edmonton cannot rely, and we've said this forever, they cannot rely just on McDavid and Draisaitl, because if a team neutralizes them, which is easier said than done, they're toast. And in the game tonight, McDavid was off, Draisaitl was non-existent, and the Oilers lost.
Yeah, but how can you get your depth scores going, Mike, when you're constantly either killing a penalty or you're on the power play? Like, the flow was just non-existent in tonight's game. And I think that was a big advantage for Florida, because Edmonton wasn't able to roll their four lines, and they weren't able to kind of get into that flow. It was either they're going to the penalty box and they're killing another penalty, or they get a power play here and there, and it's just the Stars really on. It's the Stars or the PK. So that played into Florida's hands completely. And I think the referees, I know they always say they don't want to interfere with the game, but tonight was a prime example of just put the whistles away. Let's just watch some hockey. It was still physical. It's not like them calling penalties quelled the physicality of the game. What did we see? 140 penalty minutes.
Yeah.
What? So if they put the whistles away, were we going to see 280 penalty minutes?
Well,
it's kind of ridiculous. It really, tonight was a prime example of why we don't need the referees, getting so involved in the game.
Well, I think ideally they would like to stay out of it, but when Evander Kane cross checks Forsling, I think it was
we saw worse cross checks.
Round,
second round, third round. Now they're going to start calling.
Well, I mean, and then the high, we know that high sticking or puck over the glass is going to get called every single time. If you draw blood, I mean, I think Marchand sold the high sticking penalty in the first period, but he sold it well, and they got the power play. The funny thing is, Edmonton killed off those three minors, and then it was the Arvidsson one late in the period that killed them, because then they got the second goal. I just have to say this though. I thought that the Florida Panthers would be the team that would exact some sort of retribution or be cheapskate artists. In the third period, I have never seen a team more unhinged in my life than the Edmonton Oilers, going after Bennett, going after Tkachuk. I mean,
I had nothing to lose, though, at that point.
Oh, no, I know. But I think they were purposely trying to hurt them. And okay, that's you've lost the game. You're down 6-1. Take a pound of flesh.
Yeah.
Don't be surprised if somebody goes after a guy wearing 97 or a guy wearing 29 or number 2 who was Paul Bunyan out there chopping people like he was going out, like it was going out of style. I mean, that's nuts.
How about Corey Perry after the whistle at the end there too? I mean, there was just no holds barred. I mean, like you said, penalties everywhere, all over the ice tonight. Florida, 4 of their goals were on the power play. And again, it's the kind of penalties that you're seeing from Edmonton. They looked, like you said, they looked unhinged. And they looked panicked. And I felt like watching that third period felt like watching the final 2 minutes of a basketball game where they just start fouling everyone all the time, where it just takes forever just to get to the end, where it's like, all right, we all know how this is going to end. Let's just get through it. So by the end, I felt like the Oilers, they probably hardly had anyone left on their bench because everyone had gotten misconducts and they had all gone back to the locker room. But do want to move on from the penalty conversation because we could probably talk about that all night, all week even. We got a question here. How well has Marchand worked out for the Panthers this year? Of course, do need to give him his flowers where they are due. 56 seconds in, he goes skate to stick to back of the net, scores the Panthers' first goal of the game. That was his 8th goal of the playoffs. So at age 37, he's now the oldest player to score in the first 3 games of a Stanley Cup final. Of course, he also scored in game 1 and game 2. He is just, I think there were certainly some questions around the trade. Obviously, he was traded at the deadline, and people were maybe wondering how effective is he going to be? Given his age, he was injured at the time. Is he really going to be able to make an impact now, especially playing on the bottom 6? And I think we have our answer now. I mean, he's been one of their most impactful players in this, not just this series, but I think in the playoffs. So, I mean, Michael, I'll let you decide this time. What do you think of the addition of Brad Marchand and how well this has worked out for the Panthers and just how it speaks to their roster construction and the way that, that was a move that kind of said, yeah, we are full sending and we are going for it again. We're trying to win back-to-back cups.
Yeah, 7 goals. What has he got? 17 points, 2 overtime winners. It's been a pretty good pickup there, Emma. I think we all thought Mikko Rantanen was probably the best acquisition at the deadline or thereabouts. And, Brad Marchand comes in, for a conditional pick that was going to be a second rounder, ends up being a first rounder. But who the heck cares? Because, he got the Florida Panthers again back to the final. And, it's not like they needed Brad Marchand. This was a team that was, probably still going to go to the final even without him. So it really does seem a bit unfair that the Panthers ended up with this guy and, despite his age, just keeps fitting in. And whether he's on the third line or is playing up in the lineup, it doesn't really matter. He always finds a way to put a stamp on the series.
Yeah, I think the chant you heard from the upper levels at the Amarant Bank Arena was "Thank you, Sweeney."
Yeah.
I mean, that's because, the way they screwed that negotiation up and basically him asking out and having a 1-team trade list, which was Florida, it fell into Bill Zito's lap, and he was able to make the deal before 3 p.m. on the deadline. Yeah, he's doing a great job. Do I think he's going to stay in Florida? He's gonna hit the jackpot. He could very, very easily go someplace and sign a 2 or 3 year deal for $7 or $7.5 million if he doesn't want to stay in Florida. And maybe he does. If he wins a cup there, he maybe thinks that he can win another cup there. But he might look good in blue and white.
Oh, stop it, Mike! Stop it.
Oh,
blue
we got
and white.
all
That's not Buffalo's colors, are they?
No, blue and gold.
Oh, okay.
We've got all off season for this, you guys. We will get to that, of course. Good question here. How do the Oilers bounce back in game 4? I mean, is it new lines? We've already seen a little bit of line shuffling from them. You see obviously when Zach Hyman went down in the last series, they had to shuffle some of the forwards. They've kind of rolled with different D pairings. At first, we thought maybe that was gamesmanship. They were skating different D pairings during morning skate, but then they were different by game time. And maybe now that might need to become a reality. Or, again, is it a matter of just changing the goalie? Do you start Pickard? Or is it just, the question says, a full-on group therapy sesh? I think something needs to change because, like you said, Tracos, I think you said that this Oilers team in this game looked like such a far cry from the Oilers team we saw in the first two games. I mean, they just looked completely discombobulated, unhinged. They looked like they've never been here before, and they were panicked. They were all of these, these undisciplined penalties and all of the mistakes they were making. It was just, they looked panicked and they looked flustered. So how, if at all, do they come back in game 4?
Oh, do we get another McDavid dig in speech possibly? Like, is that what we're gonna get here? Because they, I still think this Oilers team, is very much primed to win the series. It doesn't maybe look like it after this kind of defeat, but again, I'll go back to this is what Florida does to you. They can, they don't just beat you; they embarrass you and they make you question whether. I'm seeing in the chat here, someone's joking like, "Oh, it's journalism, John." Should they rebuild? Like it kind of, they can do that to you. Like they did it to the Toronto Maple Leafs. They did it to the Carolina Hurricanes. And in game 3, they did it to the Oilers. But, the Edmonton Oilers still have Connor McDavid. They still got Leon Draisaitl. I know we were searching for them tonight, but as long as those two guys show up, they can really drag everyone into maybe not the fight, but into the game. And, again, stay out of the penalty box. Protect Stuart Skinner a little bit more and just let your stars take over. Real simple.
Yeah. I think Chris Knobloch before game 4 has got to, essentially say, cut the crap out. Stop it. Because honestly, the undisciplined, you lost this game because you couldn't control your rage. You couldn't control the fact that you lost the game. You had a chance to go up 2-0. Marchand scores the goal in overtime. I think they tried to come out and tried to sort of bull rush the Panthers, and that didn't work. And they get the first goal, and then I think the frustration sort of boiled over. They can't out cheap shot and out muscle the Florida Panthers. That's not the game that you can play. You have to. Take advantage of their cheap shots and their chicanery and get the power play and, have Evan Bouchard unleash that 98-mile-an-hour slap shot and have McDavid, skate around the rink like he's, got jet engines. I mean, that's the only way they're going to win this series. If they try to get down in the muck with the Florida Panthers, this series is over with.
I guess the one good thing is like game 4, there's 2 days off between game 3 and 4. So, that does give Edmonton a chance to kind of really kind of evaluate what went wrong. And, like Mike's point, cut the crap. Like a lot went wrong here. This is one that, they definitely have to move on from, but luckily they don't have to go right back at it on Wednesday night. I think they get that extra break. That's going to serve them well.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they will certainly hope so. Good $1 million word there. Chicanery was a great way to describe it. I think we saw a lot of shenanigans, a lot of extracurriculars, a lot of this, like I said, just undisciplined. It was avoidable. And again, like you said, we had seen for 2 games to start this series, Edmonton playing their game extremely well and Florida playing their game extremely well. And for whatever reason, Edmonton decided to try to play Florida's game tonight. And as one might expect, it went horribly for them. And, speaking of trying to out muscle or out cheap shot the Florida Panthers, I mean, there was a little mini scare, I think, in the second period. Connor McDavid actually left the bench briefly. He took a hit, Aaron Ekblad just squared up on him, and it was a big hit, clean hit, but it was a big hit, knocked him on his rear, and he had to go back to the locker room. Of course, the entirety of, Oilers fandom, I think, was holding their breath until they saw him come back out onto the bench. But I mean, that's got to be a concern level too. Like, you have to let your stars be your stars and let them play, but don't let them be out there taking those kinds of hits and don't allow them to put themselves in those situations, I think. And that's kind of where Edmonton's defense, or maybe lack thereof, could, certainly come back to haunt them here.
Yeah, I don't want to see McDavid take any more hits. I don't think that's in Edmonton's best interest. Definitely. That being said, you know, the downside of, the chicanery, as Mike would say it, of Edmonton going after Florida's players, whether it's Sam Bennett or, even there's, I guess Bennett is a star player, but I'm thinking more along the lines of the Reinhardts or even the Bobrovskis. Is it does kind of open it up, and now it's open season on Edmonton Stars, and that's the last thing you want if you're, Chris Knobloch, is guys taking a pound of flesh from 97 or 29.
Yeah, I just look at where the series is right now, and it's right where Florida wants it to be. And that's not a comfortable position for Edmonton. Now, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins was a game time decision. He's a key player for the Oilers. He did play. He didn't play particularly well, but he played. Now McDavid, top pick in the 2014 draft, Aaron Ekblad, wipes him out with a clean check, top pick in the 2015 draft. They need McDavid at 100%, and they need him to be a destabilizing force for them to have a chance to win. If he's dinged up, then, I think Edmonton's chances are minuscule at best. But, he came back. He looked fine. What I was surprised at is after all the chicanery was going on in the third period, where you had the Greer, Gadjevic, they were going at Bennett. They were Nurse fighting Gadjevic. With about a minute and a half left on a power play, they put McDavid and Draisaitl out. And I thought, wow, Knobloch is really opening us. I was waiting for somebody to go at McDavid or go at Draisaitl. Nobody did. Apparently, Nate Schmidt had Draisaitl lined up and didn't do it. They won't pass on that opportunity. If Florida's up 4-5-1 in game 4, they will try to wipe them out. That's just what Florida does.
Well, we look ahead now, obviously, to game 4. Again, as you mentioned, we've got 2 days off in between games 3 and game 4. I think that, you said could be a good thing. Is there a chance that maybe this isn't as good of a thing for Florida in terms of momentum? This felt like a much closer series. It was a much closer series. It was deadlocked at 1-1 before tonight. And it really felt like it could go either way. Now, of course, all of the momentum has swung completely in Florida's favor. Do you think that having this time off in between games is going to impact that? Or I don't know. For me personally, I think looking at the way that they looked tonight, they were so calm. They were in control of the game. And that, again, normally Florida is not a team that I would describe as calm and cool and collected. And I think that they were tonight. It was like you said, Mike, they have Edmonton exactly where they want them. They have the series exactly where they want it. What would have to happen for the momentum to really swing that far in the other direction?
An injury could happen, and that could, we did also see Edmonton try to do what Florida has done to Skinner, where a couple instances where they sort of fell around Bobrovsky. Bobrovsky has had some injury problems in his history, and he's not exactly the biggest guy out there. So, they're going to try to, I think within the rules, they're going to try to, ding up the Panthers like the Panthers have dinged them up.
Let's
not forget, Edmonton was down 0-3 last year. So momentum, it can be fleeting. And, Panthers are up 2-1, not 3-1. So, there's still time. The one thing I'm worried about, Emma, is if DJ Khaled again, if he's announcing some player introductions in game 4, I'm out. I'm just turning off the
another
TV.
One. You're saying if he does another one, then then you're out. Yeah. That was
the best hockey. Okay.
The longest introduction in the history of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I think Florida would like to play game 4 at 8 a.m. tomorrow.
Who
I
would?
mean,
Edmonton or Florida?
Florida would.
Oh.
I think the best part was that DJ Khaled had an actual DJ with him while he was just yelling things into the microphone.
He's just a
But you know
hype
what?
man, let's be honest, okay? And
Hey, you know
he
what? It
served the
worked.
purpose, a
Yeah,
lot of
he
hype.
did. He served the purpose. Um, all right. So, wrapping up our conversation here again, heading into game 4 here, if we're talking about momentum, as you pointed out, momentum can be fleeting, and the Oilers have more comeback wins in these playoffs than any other team had in the playoffs. So anything could happen. But at this point, if the Panthers win game 4, looking ahead, how much does that change your outlook on this series? How much do you think that is going to be sort of the nail in the coffin? Or do you think that, let's say Florida wins game 4, they take the 3-1 series lead? Is Edmonton still in it at that point?
I think somehow, some way we're going to get to a game 7. So, whether Edmonton has to come back from down 2-1 or 3-1, inevitably this thing's going to 7 games. It just feels that way. I know this wasn't close, but games 1 and 2 were, and I'm still, my prediction was Oilers in 7. So, we haven't seen the last of the Edmonton Oilers. Let's put it that way. I think tonight was one of those ones where we're going, oh boy, is this Edmonton team maybe overmatched again against Florida? I'm not sold on that. I still think the Oilers have the 2 best players in the world. They've done it all series. Like, I didn't think they were going to be that good against the Stars, never mind the Golden Knights or even the Kings, which I thought the Kings were going to finally take down Edmonton this year. This is a good Edmonton team. I know this is a really good Florida team, but I still think that we're in for a long series.
Following your scenario, Emma, since I picked the Panthers in 6, it would fit perfectly because Edmonton would then win game 5 in front of the rabid orange and blue fans in Edmonton. And then they would come back to Florida and they would throw rats on the ice as they celebrate carrying around the Stanley Cup for the second time. So that would fit perfectly.
You're such a downer, Mike. Jeez. We invited the guy from Buffalo.
Well, that's self-explanatory. There you go.
Canadians have been waiting a long time for the Stanley Cup, Mike. Come on. You're almost Canadian, too.
Well, close. 9 miles.
I mean, objectively would be, sorry, Tracos, plug your ears, but objectively would be kind of funny to see any team but Toronto bring the cup back to Canada. I was thinking, what would be the funniest is if it was Winnipeg. Obviously not going to happen this year, but, Edmonton, maybe it is. Like you said, I think this one, it feels like a 7-game series. And we've said before, Edmonton in particular, if they made it back to the cup final for a second year in a row, they weren't losing. They aren't losing. And so at the very least, they are not going down without a fight. I think that game 4 is going to be very interesting to see what happens there, to see if Edmonton shows back up looking a little bit more like themselves. Hopefully they've learned from game 3 not to try to play Florida's game because that will not go well for them. So again, we are here every night during the playoffs talking about the game of the night. Of course, next game 4, is going to be on Thursday. So we've got a couple days off in between, but we've got some other great programming for you here at the Hockey News. We've got the big show on Tuesday. We've got the wraparound on Wednesday. And then we are back here with Playoff Frenzy Live on Thursday. So make sure you tune back in after the game on Thursday. Whatever unfolds, whatever chicanery unfolds, we will be here to talk about it. For Michael Tracos and Mike Agello, I'm Emma Lingen. This is the Playoff Frenzy Live, brought to you by Sticks.com. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you on Thursday.